People thought force reconnaissance taught a Marine how to shoot. It didn't. It taught him how to look, to lie still for 72 hours and watch a city breathe, until everything that stopped moving started telling its story. Frank Doyle was 58 years old, and he cleaned floors at the Hartwell Motors headquarters in Detroit. Third shift, 11 at night to 7 in the morning. Most people in that building didn't see him. That was fine with Frank. That was the job he had chosen. But Frank saw all of them. He saw the executive who skimmed lunch receipts. He saw the assistant who cried in the third-floor stairwell every Wednesday afternoon. He saw the security director who walked the same rounds at the same times, except for the nights when a gray pickup truck pulled into the east lot at 11:47 sharp. Frank saw everything. He just never said anything. He had not, in 20 years, been in the habit of speaking when watching was enough. That morning, Frank came home at 7:15, and his 11-year-old grandson was already awake in the kitchen, drawing 3 units of insulin into a syringe with the practiced hands of a child who had been doing it since he was 7. "My sugar's at 180, Grandpa," Tommy said. "I'm playing it safe today." "Smart boy," Frank said. "Smarter than I was at 11. What were you doing at 11, Grandpa?" "Counting things. Mostly."
Counting what?
Frank thought about it for a moment, watching his grandson cap the insulin pen. "People," he said, "doors, roads, who came and who went. My father, your great-grandfather, he used to say a man who could count without being seen would never go hungry. Did it work? Hasn't yet." Tommy laughed, and the sound was the best part of Frank's day. It always was. On the kitchen counter sat an envelope from the Department of Veterans Affairs. Frank had opened it the night before. His disability claim had been denied a second time. The letter said his service records from 2010 were incomplete. Frank knew they were not incomplete. He knew exactly where those records had gone. But a man could not prove what he could not find. Tommy's insulin pump ran out the next month, $4,800 to replace. Frank had $1,200 in his checking account, $300 in a coffee can above the refrigerator, and a credit card that was already at the limit. So Frank kept cleaning floors, and Frank kept counting. That evening, before Frank had even reached his cart, his shift supervisor, Derek Wallace, was waiting for him in the third-floor utility closet. Derek was 38 years old, a man who had never been told no by anyone smaller than him, and he had recently decided that Frank was the slowest member of his crew. "Doyle," Derek said. "You're slower than the kid I hired last month. He's 25 years younger than you, and he finishes the south wing in 40 minutes. "I finish the work in the shift," Frank said. "Finishing isn't the standard. Speed is the standard. You gotta hustle, old man." "Understood. You hear me or you understand me? Both." Derek waited a moment, looking for something more, and when nothing came, he walked away muttering. Frank pushed his cart out of the closet and started toward the east hallway. He had not gotten 30 feet when he heard the elevator open and Brandon Hartwell's voice come down the corridor at a half-shout. Brandon Hartwell was 35 years old, the only son of the company's late founder, and the CEO of Hartwell Motors for 6 years now. He had inherited the corner office, the wooden desk, and a board of directors that was, as of that morning, seriously considering an acquisition offer from a Korean manufacturer that would end the Hartwell name forever. Brandon had 18 months to prove the company was worth more than the offer. He had been drinking a little more than usual. Not enough that anyone would say it out loud. Just enough. Brandon came around the corner with 3 executives behind him, holding a paper coffee cup. He saw Frank in the middle of the hallway with the mop bucket, and he stopped. And then he threw the cup. The cup hit the marble floor 3 feet from Frank's left boot. The lid popped off, hot coffee spread in a wide brown arc across the tile. "You," Brandon said, "Janitor. Clean it." Frank set down the handle of his mop, took a folded paper towel from his back pocket, knelt, and began absorbing the spill. He did not look up. Brandon turned to the 3 executives behind him and smiled the smile of a man who was trying very hard to look like he was in charge of something. "Gentlemen," he said, "this is why I run my father's company, and he cleans my floors." 2 of the executives laughed, the polite, nervous laugh of people who did not want to be the next thing on the floor. One of them, a woman in her late 40s with an engineer's badge clipped to her blazer, did not laugh. She looked down at her shoes. Frank gathered the broken pieces of the cup into his palm. He stood up. He looked at Brandon Hartwell for 2 seconds. There was no anger in his face. There was no hurt. There was, if you were watching closely enough, only a kind of mild interest, the way a man might look at a weather pattern he hadn't expected. Then Frank turned to walk away. He took 3 steps. And then he stopped, turned halfway back, and spoke for the first time that morning in a voice that carried the length of the hallway without ever being raised. "Your father has a medal on his desk," Frank said. "I'm guessing you never asked him what it was for." And then he kept walking. He did not look back to see Brandon's face change. He did not need to. Frank had spent 20 years learning that the most powerful thing a man could put down on a table was the truth, gently, with no expectation that anyone would pick it up. Brandon Hartwell stood in the hallway for 10 seconds after Frank disappeared around the corner. The executives behind him said nothing. The woman with the engineer's badge, her name was Linda Park. She was the senior engineer on the SUV line. Looked at Brandon's face, and what she saw there was not the face of an arrogant man who had been insulted. It was the face of a young man who had just been told something he should have known years ago. That night, Frank was back on the 3rd floor at 11. He took out his small black notebook and he kept counting. The gray Ford 150 pulled into the east lot at 11:47, exactly as it had the 3 previous nights. Tuesday, 11:47. Wednesday, 11:46, Thursday, 11:48, Friday, nothing. Saturday, 11:47 again. No shift change ran that clean. No vendor delivery was that quiet. And when a pattern showed up where there should not be a pattern, that was not coincidence. That was somebody who knew something Frank didn't. And somebody who believed they would never be seen. Frank wrote down the time, then he picked up his mop and went back to work. Force Reconnaissance Scout Sniper was not, in the end, a job about the rifle. The rifle was the last 1/4% of what they did. The rest was looking, listening, counting. Scout Sniper would lie on a rooftop for 3 days and watch a marketplace below. He learned who came at what time, who sold what, who stopped to talk to whom, who never stopped at all. And after enough hours, the marketplace stopped being a marketplace and started being a pattern, a clock. A living machine with moving parts that could be predicted, and therefore disturbed. When a pattern broke, that was news. When a pattern formed where there should not be one, that was a conspiracy. Frank had learned this on the western edge of Fallujah in November of 2004. For 6 days before the assault began, he and his partner counted vehicles on the road into the city. 312 cars in 6 days. They knew which ones belonged to the city, which ones belonged to the insurgents, and which ones belonged to families just trying to get out before the bombs started. They did their job by counting. The shooting, when it came, was the smaller part. 20 years later, on the 3rd floor of the Hartwell Motors headquarters in Detroit, Frank was doing the same job. After 11 nights of confirmed observation, this is what Frank had written down in his small black notebook. 1. A gray Ford 150 pickup, Michigan plates, beginning with Bravo Sierra 3, pulled into the east loading lot 4 nights a week at the same minute, give or take 90 seconds too. Each visit, the driver left the warehouse carrying 1 black carbon fiber case, roughly the dimensions of a small briefcase. The vendor logo on the side of each case was covered with a strip of black electrical tape. 3. The drivers rotated. Frank had counted 4 different men over the 11 nights. But each of those 4 men wore the same boots. Carolina Logger work boots, size 11, with a distinctive scuff on the right, same supplier. Same warehouse club, probably same crew chief. 4. The security cameras on the warehouse floor swept on a 5-second cycle. There was a 4.5-second blind spot between the southeast camera and the loading bay camera. Frank had timed this blind spot 23 nights in a row, variance under 0.2 of a second. 5. Marcus Chen, the plant security director, walked his rounds 3 times each night. 11:15, 1:30, 4:45. Every single night that the gray Ford pulled into the east lot, Marcus Chen's 11:15 round skipped the warehouse corridor entirely. 6. Frank had pulled the inventory logs from the records room. He had a key as a janitor. Nobody ever questioned a man with a mop and a clipboard. He compared the dates to his notebook. What was missing, every time the gray Ford had visited, were engine control units. Module designation M338, the new electronic brain of the company's flagship SUV. $2,400 each at retail. $3,200 each on the gray market in Eastern Europe. 124 units had vanished in 4 months. By gray market value, that was $297,600. Marcus Chen made $110,000 a year before taxes and drove a new Mercedes that Frank had clocked in the executive parking deck 3 months earlier. A man did not need to be a force reconnaissance scout sniper to figure out what was happening. He just had to be willing to look. Most people, Frank had learned, were not. Frank closed the notebook and slid it back into the inside pocket of his coveralls. And then, 2 doors down the hallway, a member of the maintenance crew dropped a 4x8 sheet of aluminum cladding off a service cart. The crash filled the corridor. And Frank was no longer in the Hartwell Motors building. He was on a road outside a schoolhouse in Ramadi in the spring of 2006. He could smell the diesel and the cordite. He could see the kid he had gone over the wall with, the one from Tulsa with the new wife back home. He could hear the truck door coming off its hinges and hitting the wall of the school. He could see his own hand in front of him on the pavement, and he could see it shaking. And somehow he was watching that hand from somewhere else, from outside his own body. His phone was buzzing in his pocket. He let it buzz. He did not trust his voice yet. It took Frank 40 seconds to come back from the road outside the schoolhouse to the hallway outside the records room. 40 seconds during which a maintenance worker walked past him, looked at his face, and decided not to ask if he was all right. When Frank could feel the phone in his pocket again, he answered it. "Hey son, Grandpa, you said you'd pick me up at the library at 4. I'm on my way, I'll be there in 15. You okay? You sound funny. Just tired. Long shift coming up, I love you. I'm on my way." The shaking in Frank's hand did not stop until he was sitting in the driver's seat of his 1996 Ford Ranger in the employee parking lot. 20 years out of the uniform. And a piece of falling metal could still send him back to a road outside a schoolhouse in Ramadi. That was part the Veterans Administration did not want to write down on paper. That was the part they told a man to forget. Frank had never been able to. The next evening at 11:30, Frank walked to the engineering wing of the 3rd floor and stood outside the open door of Linda Park's office. He waited until she looked up. "Miss Park," he said. She looked at him for a moment without recognition. Then she set down her pen. "You're the janitor from the hallway. The one who, yes, ma'am. You're the only person in this building with the authority to escalate something past Derek Wallace without losing your job. Excuse me. Who are you?" "I'm the man who cleans your floor on the 3rd floor every Tuesday and Thursday night." "I know who cleans my floor. I asked who you are." Frank thought about it for a moment. "I'm somebody who's been watching something. I shouldn't be the only one watching." He held out the small black notebook. Linda Park took it. She read for 3 minutes without speaking. Frank watched her face go from polite curiosity to something else. By the end, her hands were not quite steady. "How long have you been compiling this?" she said. 11 nights of confirmed observation. 63 nights of suspicion. "Who taught you to do this?" "The United States Marine Corps. 1986 to 2010. Linda Park looked at him for a long time. "Frank Doyle," she said. "Yes, ma'am. I worked at the Detroit office of the Veterans Administration from 2010 to 2012. I processed your initial PTSD claim before I left the agency. My file was lost." "No, your file was not lost. I remember exactly why it was placed. And I remember who did it. I'd rather not have that conversation, ma'am. You don't have to have it with me. But somebody in this building is going to. Stay here. Don't move. I am going to make a phone call." Frank did not stay. He went back to his mop. If a man did not know how to wait, he did not know how to do anything. And there was a difference between waiting in a chair and waiting on his feet, doing the work he had been hired to do. So Frank waited by walking the 3rd floor, same as he had done for 3 years. 20 minutes later, Linda Park was sitting in the office of James Whitaker, the 71-year-old board member who had been her father's best friend in another lifetime, and who had served 3 tours with the 1st Battalion, 9th Marines in Vietnam from 1968 to 1970. The Marines had called that battalion the Walking Dead. James Whitaker did not talk about it. She slid the notebook across his desk. "You need to read this," she said. James Whitaker looked at the notebook without picking it up. "I read it 8 minutes ago," he said. Linda stared at him. How? You're not the only person in this building who notices things, Miss Park. You know who wrote it. I've known for 3 months. How? I know how a Marine walks down a hallway, Linda. I knew the first week he started here 3 years and 7 months ago. I pulled his DD-214 through a friend at the National Personnel Records Center. I read it once and put it in a drawer. I have not looked at it again. Why didn't you say anything? Because he didn't. James Whittaker leaned back in his chair. A man tells you who he is by what he chooses not to say. I waited to see if Frank Doyle wanted to be recognized. He did not. So I let him be the man he wanted it to be. Now he's come to us. But notice, he didn't come to us about himself. He came to us about the theft. That's him doing his job. He would have done the same thing in a parking lot at a Walmart in Toledo. So what do? We take the theft to the board this morning. The theft. Not him. Never him. And then, when the board is done with the theft, I'll handle the rest. There's a tape his father gave me 5 years ago. I should have given it to Brandon a long time ago. This morning is the morning. The emergency board meeting started at 9:45. Brandon Hartwell was already at the head of the table, walking the directors through the latest revisions to the Korean acquisition offer. James Whittaker stood up before the third slide. Brandon, before we vote on anything, I need to put 2 items on the table. James, with respect, we don't have time. We have time for this. James Whittaker placed 2 objects on the polished wood. The first was the small black notebook. The second was a VHS tape in a plain white case. Item 1, he said, a 4-month internal theft operation. $297,600 in stolen engine control units. Run by our own plant security director, Marcus Chen, with a 4-man crew. Times, plates, vendor handoffs. Camera blind spots, inventory cross-references. The board has not been informed. I am informing you now. Who put this together? Brandon said. Item 2, James said. He held up the tape. This is a recording your father made in 2018, 6 months before he died. He gave it to me and told me to give it to you when you were ready. I have decided that this morning you are ready. I may be wrong about the timing. I am not wrong about the contents. Play it, Brandon said. A board member rolled a flat screen on a cart to the head of the table. James Whittaker fed the tape into the VCR clipped to the back of the screen. There was a hiss, a flicker, and then William Hartwell appeared on screen. He was sitting in the office his son now occupied. He looked tired. He looked like a man who had decided to say something difficult while he still could. Hello, son. If you're watching this, I am gone. And James decided it was time. Trust James on the timing. He has been right about every important call in my life. William paused. In the wooden box on my desk, the one I told you never to open, there are 6 medals. 5 of them are mine. 1 of them is not. The one that is not mine is a Bronze Star with Combat V. It belonged to a Marine Force reconnaissance scout sniper named Frank Doyle. I met him in Fallujah in November of 2004. I was there as a civilian contractor, delivering an armored vehicle order to the Marine Corps. My convoy was ambushed on the road from Camp Fallujah at 2 in the afternoon. Frank Doyle and his 3-man recon team held a rooftop position above us for 9 hours, and they kept us alive until the extraction came in. He never asked for credit. A year later, I tracked him down and tried to send him a thank you. He sent the medal back to me with a letter. The letter said, I already have one of these, sir. You keep it. Put it on your desk. Remember that freedom is not free. Remember it especially on the days when somebody in your building stops believing it. So I kept it on my desk, every day, for 15 years. And every day for 15 years I tried to be a man who deserved to keep a medal that was not mine. Brandon, if you are listening to this, you are now the man behind that desk. The medal stays with the desk, not because of me, because of him. I love you, son. Be the man he thought I was. The tape ran into static. James Whittaker turned off the screen. The boardroom was completely silent. Brandon Hartwell sat very still for a long moment. He was not looking at the screen. He was looking at the door of the conference room. Through the narrow window in the door, he could see Frank Doyle in the hallway outside, pushing a mop bucket past the elevators. Frank had not heard a word of it. He did not know any of it was happening. How long has he been working in this building? Brandon said. 3 years and 7 months, James said. And you let me. I didn't let you do anything, Brandon. You did what you did because nobody taught you otherwise. That is on me, too. That's on all of us in this room who watched your father raise you and did not say enough. Today you have a chance to learn it. Where is he right now? Cleaning the hallway outside this door. Brandon Hartwell stood up. He walked out of the boardroom without another word. The directors did not stop him. In the hallway, Frank was bending over to wring out his mop. He looked up when Brandon's shadow fell across the floor. "Sir, Mr. Doyle, I just learned about my father and about you." "There is nothing to learn, sir. We both did the jobs we were supposed to do." "The medal on his desk, the one in the wooden box. It is yours." Frank did not answer right away. He set down the mop. "Your father was a good man," Frank said. "You should open that box, not for me. For him. I humiliated you in front of my staff yesterday morning. You humiliated a man who cleans floors. That was who I was to you then." Frank looked at Brandon for the first time without looking away. "You know better now. What you do with that is your business. What can I do for you? Right now. Finish your meeting. You have a company to run, I have a hallway to mop. Both of those things still need to be true tomorrow morning." 3 days later, federal agents arrested Marcus Chen and 3 other men outside a freight forwarder in Hamtramck. The white-collar crime division told Brandon Hartwell that Frank Doyle's notebook had been the foundation of the affidavit and that the case was airtight. They expected guilty pleas within 90 days. That evening, Brandon Hartwell found Frank again, this time in the supply closet on the 3rd floor, restocking paper towels. "Mr. Doyle, can we talk?" "Yes, sir. I want to offer you a position. Director of Internal Security, 6 figures, an office on the 4th floor. You'd report to me directly. I have already cleared the budget." Frank thought about it for a long moment. Then he shook his head. "I appreciate the offer, sir. I can't take it." "Why not?" Frank set down the stack of paper towels. "I can't work days. I can't work near the assembly floor. The sound of a pneumatic press, the sound of a wrench dropping on concrete. When I hear those sounds, I am not in this building anymore. I am back in Ramadi. I need 3rd shift. I need a quiet hallway and a mop. That is the only job I can do without falling apart in front of somebody who depends on me. Then what can I do? My VA disability claim is on its 3rd appeal. It was denied twice because my service records from 2010 were lost. I need a letter from a CEO confirming that my employment at Hartwell Motors is consistent with combat-related disability accommodations. That is all I need. 1 letter, on letterhead. Done, tonight, before I leave the building." "Thank you, sir." Brandon waited. "Frank, is there anything else? Anything at all?" "Yes, one more thing. Name it. The medal in the wooden box. Leave it there. On the desk. Where your father kept it. You don't want it back. I gave it to him for a reason. The reason hasn't changed." Frank came home that night at 7 in the morning. Tommy was at the kitchen table working a problem set out of a geometry textbook he had checked out from the library. "Grandpa, you home early?" "Just for a minute, son. Going back out at 10. "What's that in your hand?" Frank set a small piece of metal on the table in front of his grandson. It was half of a stainless steel dog tag, worn smooth at the edges from years of being carried in a pocket. The name on it was Sergeant David Doyle, Tommy's father, Frank's son, killed in Helmand Province in 2018. "It's your father's," Frank said. "It's yours now." "Why now?" "Because today I met a young man who still has a father. He doesn't know yet what that is worth. You know, you have known too early. Wear this when you need to remember that you are not alone." "I'll wear it every day, Grandpa." "You don't have to wear it every day. You just have to know where it is." That night at 11, Frank Doyle put on his coveralls, picked up his keys, and walked out of the apartment toward his 1996 Ford Ranger. Detroit was cold. The streetlights threw long shadows across the parking lot of the building. Some men carry their medals on their chest. Some men carry them in their pocket. And some men carry them in the way they clean a floor, because somebody's father once stood on that floor and said, "Thank you." Frank Doyle cleaned floors at the Hartwell Motors headquarters in Detroit. 3rd shift. 11 at night to 7 in the morning. Most people never saw him. That was the job he had chosen.